I'm loving being here, talking about one of my favorite topics about how do you, um, like, what's the topic? How do you deal with overwhelm? And here's the good news. When you are overwhelmed, please know, and I mean with this with all the love possible, that it is 100% within your control, and therefore it is 100% your fault, and not from a judgmental or blaming perspective. But know that. And when I realized that anytime I feel overwhelmed, I feel um, I have the ability to change that feeling in that moment, then I was completely empowered to go, oh, wait a second, I can choose a better way. And that is what I'm going to share with you today. A few tactics, a few ways of thinking differently. And the other thing, though, like, let's start with the reality that it's an overwhelming world right now. Okay. There's a lot of stuff happening and a lot of things that potentially are out of your control, and not potentially, that are. And so our reaction to that is a stress reaction, very normal. Feeling overwhelmed is very typical. And it is from people who are, even like, I've talked with some people who are totally normally like all together, they got it all figured out, and they're just going through life, and they're really successful, and they're feeling really overwhelmed. And other people who are just normally overwhelmed, or it's like magnified. And so I used to be somebody who got really overwhelmed with a lot of things. I still have it as a natural set point, meaning that when there's a lot of things going on, I have to practice all of my own techniques that I'm going to share with you today so that I can pull myself out of that. Okay. And it absolutely is possible. And the challenge with feeling overwhelmed is that, while there are many, number one, it's an uncomfortable feeling. Two, it was going to steal your productivity, meaning, like, how do you focus on anything and get anything important done when you have this sense of anxiety and overwhelm that is looming, and sort of the foundation for everything that you're going through? And the other piece of the puzzle, at least this is how it's often been for me, is I get paralyzed. So when I'm overwhelmed, I will probably not do anything. It's going to be the moment. That's where, my Netflix subscription is going to come in really handy, because overwhelm often leads to paralysis. And that definitely is the case for me. So I will talk about how I get out of that. All right. So now that we know we need to get out of overwhelmed, let's actually, before I even do that, let's define what I mean by feeling overwhelmed. And I think this is going to show up differently for everybody. For me, it feels very much like anxiety. It feels like I'm very buzzy, like all these things going on around me. I find it takes me out of my feeling of calm, right? Or my feeling of peace and focus, and like, I got this confidence. Okay. So it might show up differently for you. Uh, Essentially, what it is caused by the fact that we are emotionally reacting to everything that's happening around us, instead of, or things that need to get done often, instead of looking at and reacting emotionally to each one as its individual need to be dealt with. Okay. And I know I've talked about this in the past in the show, but one of the things that happens a lot is a misplaced emotion. Okay. So, and this is how overwhelm can happen. So we might be upset about this thing over here that's very legitimate, and maybe we're scared, or we're emotionally charged, or we're angry, or something, a very legitimate human emotion. Okay, to a very legitimate problem or challenge that we face. So that's on one side. But then over here, all these things. So let's say it's, I got to get this report out for a client, or I've got to, um, you just fill in the blank. You got to fill out this form or whatever. And we take the emotion that is very legitimate and related to this issue, and we accidentally apply it to this unrelated issue that does not deserve the same level of emotional charge. Okay? And that when we take these human emotions that are really legitimate and, you know, charged, what I mean by that, like they're very powerful. If we're not aware of them, if we're not feeling them effectively, if we're not leaning into them and associating them with the right challenge, okay, what happens is they have a tendency to cloud everything. And a lot of things that don't deserve it. And this creates a feeling and a sense of overwhelm. And so we can even look at this at your task list. So everything you need to get done. One of the reasons people get really overwhelmed is I just have too much to do, too little time, too few resources, not going to happen. Oh my God, when am I going to get it? I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to do all this kind of stuff. And the truth of the matter is that those tasks live externally and independently of your emotional reality. So this is where it's so empowering when I say that it's your fault. It's not like in a judgmental way, but the overwhelm is because you're associating and you're reacting to this big list of things that needs to get done. But the list of things that needs to get done doesn't require your emotional reaction. It requires your action to get it done. Okay, so this sort of thinking is so incredibly important because what ends up happening is that it's unnecessary. All right, we've got a comment. Who we got? Greg. I'm pleased to be joining you this afternoon from LinkedIn. Perspective is the first thing to go when overwhelm makes its appearance. Exactly. And so this is where we want to get our muscles, our daily resilience muscles, so fine-tuned. And that's my choice of making muscles. We want to get them so inherent in how we operate in our lives that the second we notice that stress response, the anxiety, the feeling of overwhelm, I'm using all of those interchangeably for a reason, is because I think it's actually the same sensation for most of us. As soon as we feel that, I want you to go into this process, okay? So the first thing, if you've followed along and you're aware of my problem-solving framework, it's very simply, we first start with situational awareness, what's really happening. Self-awareness, how am I responding to what's happening? And how am I potentially making it harder to deal with? AKA throwing overwhelm into the mix. And then we look at solution activation. The situational awareness, I've already started talking about some of these philosophies, is like we want to get so crystal clear on what is the issue. How come I'm feeling overwhelmed? And, you know, even last week, I was feeling overwhelmed for not a long time because that's the whole point is like we use the problem solving framework to interrupt these patterns. Okay. Not to make them never happen again, because that I believe is unrealistic. But when they happen, that we can interrupt them really fast because we've got these tools in our tool belt. And what happened for me is I was feeling the sense of anxiety and overwhelm and just like, oh my God, there's so much to get done. And, you know, people aren't around for me to get it done. And, you know, I got these sales to make and da, da, da. And I had to like interrupt myself and go, whoa, Allie, problem solving framework. First one, what's the real issue? Because there are 10, I mean, I teach this in my full experience, like my full training program. There are 10 rapid fire questions that I have people ask whenever they're overwhelmed or stressed. And we go through them really quickly. And I use them in like 2 minutes, and it like totally gives me the whole perspective. But anyway, we won't go through all those today. But if you do work with a company who has training, bring me in and I will go through them all. But here's the thing. So we start with what's the real issue? And what I recognized when I took pen to paper is that that emotion was about a specific situation that, again, like I was saying earlier, deserves full emotion. It deserves the quote unquote, you know, not, no, because it doesn't deserve a stress response. It definitely was scary and concerning and completely out of control and all of those different things. But it was doing what I already talked about, which is taking that dark cloud and putting it all over everything, which was magnifying the intensity of the things I needed to get done. Right? And so by honing in on what are the real issues, I was able to, with pen to paper, recognize, okay, I got to deal with that. This is okay. I mean, I should just pause that, deal with that. And then here are the other things that I'm sort of taking that emotion out on. And if I actually look at this, there really is only like, that's what's happening. So as soon as I get something out on paper, I can emotionally disassociate from it in the sense of giving myself a little bit of objectivity. And I'm hoping the same for you. Okay. So we first start, what's the real issue? Now, before I go into the second thing we're going to ask, I'm going to bring Greg's comment up here again. By the way, if you're watching live, comment away. I'll bring up your comment. And if you are someone who's watched on the follow-up, I always follow the comments after the fact. So you're more than welcome to do that, and I'll still answer your questions. I find it can be helpful to share your end goal with team members or kids. As you said, there is often a disconnect between the things that bring us stress and how we communicate with others. Yeah, it's because when we're in that state of overwhelm or anxiety, everything gets overshadowed, including how we respond. Right? Like bang on, exactly. So we've got this, what is the real issue? Then we want to look at what's within my control versus out of my control. And that is so critical. And sometimes I hear people say that and it's like, well, don't worry about anything that's out of your control. And then I'm like, well, this is the human experience and that's not how we function as a general rule. So instead, I want you to have some objectivity about it. Okay, that is out of my control. What aspects of it are within my control so you can feel empowered? Again, pen to paper. But also looking through the lens of that's out of my control and how does that make me feel? Right? What is the true emotion I'm feeling around that? So I started to have a little bit of anxiety yesterday about what's happening in the world. I mean, as many of us, I'm sure, have at varying degrees, at varying times throughout our recent and not so recent history. And I was really concerned about what life is going to look like in the future. Living in the future, never good for overwhelm, for the record. I was feeling a lot of anger towards some people I know who are in the government, and I will not name them. And I'm like, I think you're better than this, and you could be making better choices. So I started to have that emotion, right? And then I started to think, okay, what do I need to do to help the situation? And I'm like, okay, well, I don't see any good coming out of that because I don't think I can make a difference. And I also want to be sure that I'm using my energy to bring light out into the world, not to get dragged into the social media posts and the mud and all of that, and want to really like influence and choose very thoughtfully what I allow into my sphere. So overwhelm, aka anxiety, feeling about the world, started to notice how that was impacting me and went, okay, what's the real issue? All right, well, I feel powerless. So that's something out of my control. And so I had to lean into that instead of just doing what so many people tell us to do. Oh, ignore everything that's out of your control. I was like, okay, that's out of my control and I've got to honor it. I've got to feel the feels. I've got to go into that and be like, okay, and what's the worst case scenario of that happening? And play that out a little bit. And then what's the best case scenario of that happening and play that out a bit? Because we never want to play out a worst case scenario without counteracting it in our imagination with the best case scenario. Otherwise, we can start spiraling into the negativity. And by doing that exercise and understanding what's within my control, what's out of my control, I was able to pull back that sensation of overwhelm and anxiety and go into a feeling of, okay, these are the things that within what I control that I'm going to actually do. Because the flip side of it is, so what's out of our control, we need to acknowledge the emotions we're having around it. And what's within our control, we need to take action in order to feel like we're actually accomplishing something, to move the needle, as opposed to getting stuck. Because as I said, that sensation of overwhelm can cause paralysis, right? So that would be the next piece. After that, we want to start going into the framework around, is it a task, an obstacle, or an adversity? And I'm not going to get into that today. If you have not been watching me enough to know what that means, you need to go and find one of those. You need to go find that maybe in my book or in one of my online courses, because I'll tell you, that'll change your life when you finally get to see it. Task, obstacle, adversity. Task we do, obstacle we solve, adversity we need space to heal from. And then with that overwhelm, so we've gone situational awareness, those are those first three questions. Then we go into our self-awareness. How am I responding, and how am I potentially making it harder to deal with? And so when I'm feeling that sense of overwhelm, I've already mentioned, I always go to pen and paper, because I start to think, okay, what is it that really, really, really needs to get done? What do I think I need to get done? Because sometimes when we get it out on paper, I remember one of my clients, we were working together and she's like, I'm so overwhelmed. I'm like, okay, well, what's going on? She goes, well, all these client things have to be done and nobody's getting followed up with, and I don't have a system to do it. And when we actually sat down and wrote out, I'm like, okay, well, let's figure out what balls are being dropped and let's get them on paper. And she's like, I don't want to know. And I'm like, you can't fix overwhelm if you don't actually know what is in the whole sphere of your thing. Because when it just hangs out up here, it gets dramatized and magnified and, catastrophized very often. Mitzi, I don't know what that means, so I'm not going to put it up in case it's something that's more, I don't know. You can write out the real words. I may not be cool enough for knowing what that actual comment means, so I won't bring it up. But yeah. Okay. So do you see where we're at here at this point? So how am I responding? And often when we're feeling overwhelmed, it's going to be accompanied with a physical sensation. And so you've got to figure out, okay, where am I holding it? And then counteract that hold. So for me, I am often, if I'm overwhelmed or stressed or anxious, I'm going to hold it up here in my chest and my shoulders are going to come up here. Okay. So I counteract that by pulling my shoulders down and breathing down deeper. And that physical reset can actually shift you enough so that you can actually find out how we're going to move through this. Okay. So then we're going to think, okay, what is the mental reaction? So what storyline am I telling right now that is intensifying this sense of overwhelm? And so often it's like, we'll end up, there'll be some negative storyline. Oh my God, there's so much work to do. I'm never going to get it done. What is wrong with me? Why can't I get this stuff done? My colleagues are always getting all their stuff done. They're not. There's lots of elements here, but deconstruct that story, because our brain doesn't have a sense of humor. It doesn't know that it's not true. So it will react accordingly. If you start going down the spiral of saying, like, I'm going to lose my job if I don't get this done. Well, of course you're going to be overwhelmed. Oh my God, I'm going to lose my job. Like, I got these tasks to do and I'm going to lose my job. Well, then you don't want to do the job, right? Like, this is a big deal. And so we want to look at what those stories and then challenge the stories, right? Like, what is fact? What is make-believe? And where's the in-between, right? Like, where can I change and shift the story. Now, I don't mean like change it and shift it to a point where you're like, magic fairy dust, right? Like, oh yes, look at my to-do list. I got so much to do, but it's all going to get done and, nothing at all to stress about. Well, that's not going to work either. But you can look at it, and this goes into solution activation. Actually, we'll stop there for a second. The next thing I want you to do is consider the emotion that you're feeling. So there are different philosophies. Does our physical influence our mental, which influences our emotional? So if I'm feeling, if I'm malnourished, okay, then I feel like sort of run down. And then it's harder to create a positive storyline, or at least an objective storyline. And it's easier to catch from falling into the big spirals, okay? Then the emotion, well, now I've got this negative storyline and that's influencing, and I feel sad, and all of these different emotions, which are all very valid part of the human experience. And then there are other people who say that it's your mental thought that will influence all of those. So if I'm saying I feel really exhausted, then your body's going to play along, and then your emotions are going to be impacted as well. And so quite frankly, I think it all just meshes together. I think that if we change one of those factors, if we can positively influence even one of them, then the others will follow suit. Okay. But it doesn't matter which one you influence, but as long as you're doing the thing. So even like, I don't think having deep breaths, which, just breathe when you're really overwhelmed and anxious, is going to be the thing that is completely going to bring you out of overwhelm. However, if you stay shallow in your breathing, then you could likely imagine it's going to be harder for you to mentally get out of that sensation of feeling anxious. So it needs to be all of it, but you can pick what's the easiest one for you to start with. And I think the most powerful one for you to start with is your mental game, right? What are the words I'm using? What is the storyline I'm telling? How do I fix this? Create an alternative storyline. So all of that to say, those are the first two elements of the problem-solving framework as it relates to the concept of feeling overwhelmed and anxious. And if you go through that's going to give you enough objectivity to kind of go, okay, that's how I'm feeling. That's the state I'm in. That's my current reality. And then we can go and we'll have the clarity to find out what's the next thing that needs to happen. And this is where we go into solution activation. Okay. So to come out of overwhelm, we want to look at all those things that are causing you overwhelm. We've gone through the process of identifying, are they tasks, are they obstacles, are they adversities? And then we want to look at, this is where the task circle philosophy that I've created and I share in this book, right, is so incredibly powerful. But a few of the concepts out of the task circle, things like we want to chunk down the biggest projects into smaller projects. So let's say you're really overwhelmed because you are about to move and you've got to pack up your house. Okay. And if you were to pack up your house, like if you're like looking at the entire house and you're going, oh my God, I've lived here for 20 years. I haven't got a clue. How am I going to get through it? That's going to feel overwhelming. But if you go through and you go, okay, I've got to pack up, and you list out the different rooms that you have to pack up. And then you go even to a granular level and you go, okay, what's the easiest room that I could get through? Okay, well, I could get through the bathroom would be the easiest. Probably isn't, but I'm just making stuff up. Okay, well, that's the easiest one. When I get in there, okay, or maybe you go into, let's say, your family room. Okay, that might be the easiest. And then you chunk it down this bigger project. Even at that level, you go, okay, so I need to pack up the books. I need to figure out how I'm going to transport the technology and the TVs and all of that. I've got to sort through those DVDs because we don't even have a DVD player anymore. And I'm going to give them away. I'm going to figure out what needs to go to charity. And then and then you chunk it down again. Okay, so I've got 3 boxes. I've got charity, I've got keep, I've got garbage, or whatever. And so everything that causes us overwhelm, we want to get it down to its lowest common denominator. Okay, so we go like right down to the smallest task you can get. And if you're someone who's really overwhelmed, like I'm talking, what's 5 minutes of that 5-hour project that you can take a step to? And so sometimes, because again, fully admitting it's a natural state for me to look at everything and go, I'm so overwhelmed. But I know I've learned this stuff enough. I've created enough frameworks. See, your message to be able to overcome it very quickly. Okay. So I have done a point where I have gone so granular on something that it's like, it's a 2-hour task and I've got like 25 5-minute or 10-minute tasks that I can do. And then I look through and I look at everyone and go, okay, how long is that going to take me? How long is that going to take me? How long is that going to take me? And depending on how overwhelmed I feel, I might go down to like, pretty like, I'm going to do this 1-minute thing. And then I'm going to do this 2-minute thing. And then I'm going to do this 3-minute thing and just progress along. And you may think, well, that could be overwhelming to create that list. But I know so many people who, like myself, feel such satisfaction from checking things off of a list, putting the big red check mark on our piece of paper. And so if you need to create that level of focus, right, and effort, then it really is, it can be one of those things, invest time today to buy back time tomorrow, but in the immediate. So you're feeling really overwhelmed. You spend 2 minutes going through those little elements that I already talked to you about, the first 6 questions of the rapid fire resilience rundown. And then you go into that solution where you're using the task circle and you pull things like down to their lowest common denominator on the task, like the lowest task. I don't think that's how common denominator is used, but anyway, like just down to the absolute lowest, smallest task you can find. Okay. And then start picking off on those things. But the key, going back to the original point that I was making, is that feeling overwhelmed is a reaction to all of the things that are happening out there, whether you're on your list and things you need to do, or they are happening in the world around you and there's circumstances within your control or out of your control. Overwhelm, anxiety, stress, destructive stress is our reaction to those things. And because of that, you are 100% empowered to actually deal with each one, to interrupt the pattern of having overwhelm be the reaction. Okay. So I hope that inspires you. I hope that makes you feel like you've got this, right? And then you just put it down. Like, even like I said, if it could be, gosh, I don't know. I'm going to look on something on my list here. Okay. So I'm trying to create a new CRM, and I really want a CRM that just goes into a project management system without having to go to another system. Like, I don't get why that's so hard. Anyway, but I found one that I'm testing, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's going to take me so long to learn it, blah, 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 blah. And again, overwhelm, right? And I was like, all right, what's the real issue? I went through the whole process. And then what I did was I made, actually, I wonder if it'll be under here somewhere, my little checklist. Oh, where is it? Right here. There we go. Okay, let me find it. I'm going to do a systems map, how my systems are going to go through. I'm going to do a client lifecycle map. How is it going to go? I've got to create the stages that I want people to go through. I'm going to look at my old pages and strategy that I did from ages ago. And anyway, it was just like each one of those things was really doable, whereas the big thing felt really overwhelming. And then it just got to the point where, okay, I'm just going to do the tables. I'm going to edit the tables on one thing, right? And that just sort of helped and helped and helped. So I hope that helps you. And if you're feeling overwhelmed, like, I get it. I totally do. And it's completely natural. It's completely normal. And it's completely within your control to stop. Because I know that if you don't stop it, it's going to make your head hurt. I don't know about you, but that's how I often feel, right? It's like, this is like, and that's the sign of overwhelm. Like, mind blown, right? Well, no, we don't want that. We don't want that. We want you to feel like in your absolute power. And I believe in you to be able to do that. Now, if you would like to work through this process with somebody, i.e. me, I am available for coaching. I do coaching. I have an online program called Take Back Your Weekends, Stress Less, Do More, Be Happier, that brings this book to life. And I think it's out right now at like $297 US. Like it needs to be a couple thousand, quite frankly, because there's so much gold in there. So just being really aware that those are options for you. And of course, if you're with a team and you have a team who you feel like is really stressed and overwhelmed, then let's talk about having me come in and do my training program, etc., where it's very systematic. And we have, I have it takes 8 to 12 weeks to go through the program. And so I'd love to be able to do that with your team. So anyway, I wanted to let you know about those options because this is a process. But here's what I know to be true, is that when you implement tools that can pull you out of a feeling of overwhelm, your productivity will soar, your happiness will soar, your ability to relate to people will soar. You will feel more accomplished, you'll feel more empowered, you'll feel more in control, all those beautiful things. You won't, succumb to things like procrastination, right? It's like, you can pull yourself out of this. So exciting. Anyway, I hope you have had a beautiful day. And until next week, when we come on live again at 3:15 p.m. Eastern, may you stress less, do more, and be happier. Bye for now.